same guy, but he learns how to spell better
Okay.
and eventually becomes a Mennonite pastor.
Okay.
Which in those days, well, even in the '60s, they chose the pastors by lot.
Okay.
They put three names or so in a Bible, and
Okay.
wherever the Bible falls open to, that's who gets the pastorate.
Really?
Yeah. So there are two people from Fulton County, Charles Gauchi and Dale Dale Wise. Both of them were chosen by lot the same
Really?
day. Yeah, this is back in the '60s.
I'll be darned.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
two Mennonite pastors.
Huh.
So they pastored together for a couple of years, and then Charles stayed with Central Mennonite in Archbold for a while, and when they did a church planting up near Wasion called Inlet Mennonite Church,
Okay.
Dale went up there.
Okay.
We had Charles. Charles was our almost part of our family. We'd known him so long, so he did the graveside thing, and
Okay.
then
Okay.
the two pastors from Central did the memorial service.
Okay. 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 Huh. That's amazing. I didn't realize how that was done.
Yeah. So anyhow, in the second book I'm gonna go into the whole background of the Anabaptist movement, which is the predecessor to the Mennonites,
Okay. All right.
and give all kinds of history so people who don't know what the Anabaptists are or the Mennonites, they'll have all that information. And they did things like tongue screws.
Tongue screws.
Yeah, put it to keep them from talking. This is in a book called Murder's Mirror.
Okay.
They would take spikes and drive it down through their legs, through the calf and everything into the floor.
Why would they do that?
Torture.
Man? Huh?
Torture. The back in this is the 1500s.
Yeah. Okay.
The Catholics had rules about everybody had to be baptized as a baby.
Okay.
The Lutherans came along and kept basically the same method. The Anabaptists came along and said you had to be a believer. You had to be old enough to make decisions for yourself,
Okay.
which
Okay.
was against the law
Okay. All right.
because it was like church state kind of thing
Okay. All right.
in Europe. And so the Anabaptists started baptizing babies, and before long, they started getting persecuted. You have a pen available? You have a pen or something?
Yep, I do.
There we go.
There you go.
I'm going to check off what we talk about and what we don't.
Cool. Very good. Steely Dan. 8 minutes after 11 o'clock on the Q96.5 FM. Peg. And with us right now is not Peg, but Dave. David Miller, our guest here this morning. David, welcome in here today.
Oh, so glad to be here today.
Always good to see you, man. It's always good to see you. In your conversation, you and I's conversation getting you in here today, you said something about this was your 38th anniversary date.
It is.
And so you thought, man, what a great way to celebrate today. You come in, you talk to me, and then you and the wife are going out to lunch.
No doubt. I
like that. Well, anytime you can do that is a good day, and I'm sure that you're like me. Without our wives, I don't know who we'd be or where we'd be right at this point.
Indeed. And one of the fun things we do is celebrate every month on the 17th.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we've done that for pretty close to 38 years.
Have you
We've
really?
missed a couple months when things were really stressful or I was in the hospital or something like that. But for the most part, we've done that for every month.
So you're sitting there saying, okay, this is our 37th year and 9th month.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And wake her up at 2 minutes after 12, and she slugged me and go back to sleep. Yeah.
And she stayed with you for 30
Yeah,
years.
how about that?
That's the thing. That's the mind-boggling part of that whole process right there. If that's the case, man. That she's hung around with you for that long. That's just that's a true testament to true love right there.
It is.
Right there,
it is.
Huh?
Yeah.
Good. Well, I'll tell you, the reason you're in here today is a couple things. Because, first of all, obviously, I think everybody that has listened to the program understands that you're not only an author, but you're also a guy who has a great love for the presidents and the history of the presidents of the United States.
Well, some of them I love, and some of them not so much. But that's the way with all of us, I think.
I think you're right. I think it's exactly how it is. Now, your first book, we'll start with that because I know you got another book coming as well. But you had the Traveler's True Tale that you wrote about Daniel Mueller. Okay?
Correct. Or Danny.
Danny, as you called him in the book.
Yeah.
How's that going? How's everything with that one?
Well, it's selling pretty well as the book, but now we've also been able to get it onto Kindle, so Amazon Kindle. And so people out there who like to read it either on their computer or on their handheld device, it's available out there for you at Amazon. And, instead of a full price of $20, you can get it for $10.
That's amazing. It totally is amazing the technology that we're dealing with nowadays, isn't it, huh?
Yeah,
and,
very much so.
What would some of the guys that we're about to talk about here down the road think of these things? What an Abraham Lincoln and go back to George Washington. What would they think about the things that we can do and accomplish?
It would be mind-boggling because for example, just going to the moon was a dream for ages, and finally it actually happened. It's just amazing. But, there was a book by Ben Bova, who's a science fiction writer, and he predicted ebooks.
Okay.
And he said that people would try and kill because it was taken away from publishers.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah. So he did a mind-boggling kind of thing about that. And I don't actually have the book, but I think it's available at the library. So
that is. When was that written there?
I would guess in the late 1900s. Yeah, 1980 or 1980, 1990, someplace in there.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Well, and I tell you, we don't know what's coming, I don't think, but we can always guess, and it's amazing how some of these folks can somehow just almost see into a crystal ball and predict things like that.
Arthur Clarke predicted space stations, things like that, and that's things that are commonplace today.
Yeah, we just take them for granted anymore. Yeah, we do. Now, we've not gotten quite to the Jetsons. That was always my favorite.
You know, that's
you know what I mean?
Yeah, we get flying cars that, I think I might walk. But anyhow.
I'm just scared about the self-driving cars.
Yeah,
right at this point
really.
You know what I mean?
They got to work the bugs out first, I think, on that one.
They need to work a lot of bugs out before I want to look over to my right and see a car that has nobody in it driving the darn thing, and he's sitting in the back seat, on his telephone or working his cable or whatever the heck he's going to be doing at that point in time. That might be a little scary. You have a second book coming, though, don't you?
Yeah, I've got a working title called Memoirs of an Old Man, and I basically use the same character, but I move him from 1802 or 1804 to 1806, and jump him all the way up to 1863. Mm-hmm. Same character, a whole lot of different things, and when I get that finished, I'll let you all know.
Wow. The changes that Danny went through in those 50 years, roughly, compared to the changes we go through, I'm sure were considerable as well, huh?
Well, yeah, because all of the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition were single, and I have Danny move back to Ohio, which is my roots, so I put him nearby, over in Defiance, Ohio.
Okay.
And I'll just give you a couple hints of what's in the book. Their church congregation becomes parts of the Underground Railroad.
Oh, wow.
And there really were some people in Defiance, and even in Stryker. I don't know the names of the people in Stryker, but I have a real name of a guy in Defiance. And he had connections with a probate judge up in Monroe, Michigan. And so it moved from Defiance to Monroe and then on up into Canada.
Oh, man, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So he got involved in something that was truly happening right here in our backyard.
Exactly.
At that point in time.
Yeah.
So it's easy kind of to make that jump, I would think.
Yeah.
From your character who is fictional to what was really going on back in that day.
Which is essentially what I did with Lewis and Clark, too. I did a fictional character, but pretty much everything else is historically accurate in that book.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, well, that is fantastic. Let's go away from the book, because the book, this one, when do you expect this one to be out? How much, I know you can never tell how long it's going to take. But,
the first one took 8 years. I don't expect that long for the second one, because once you got the bug of writing, you have an idea of what people are looking for, and it really helps the thing along. So I'm about halfway through, I think, at this point.
Oh, that's good. Okay. So we're expecting this maybe in the next year or so, roughly.
Yeah, maybe 2 years. Yeah.
Okay, to have the second one, and the title of that one is
Memoirs of an Old Man is the working title.
Memoirs of an Old Man right now, but that could change obviously in the next couple of years as things kind of transpire as well.
Indeed.
We have an awful lot of controversy going on with the president right at this point in time, good or bad, whichever way that you want to look at this thing. That's not unusual.
Every president goes through that. Yeah.
As you go back and through history, can you think of maybe a president or two that obviously we all could think of Richard Nixon right away, but there have been other presidents that have had the same sort of turmoil and controversy as the one that we have right now, is there not?
Well, one of the biggest ones probably in American history was Abraham Lincoln had chose a Democrat, Andrew Johnson, to become his vice president, and it was basically to cross boundaries to try and gain more votes. Who would have known that Lincoln would be assassinated and this upstart from Tennessee would come in and become president? And so he had a whole lot of plans, and Congress really didn't like it, so they impeached him. He missed impeachment by 1 vote.
Wow.
Which is extremely close.
Yes.
Even in 1866 or something like that. But that's probably one of the closest elections. Obviously, was Bush and Gore,
right? Where
it went back and forth for weeks, not knowing who was going to end up being president.
Right.
It finally went to the Supreme Court for them to decide.
Yeah.
And even then, it was 1 vote majority.
Yeah. It was back in the old hanging Chad days. I remember those at that point.
In 2000, yeah.
Yeah. So it's been something that has happened, and we have survived as a country through each and every one of them.
Yeah, amazingly though.
Yes, entirely. I agree with you. And whether we'll survive through this one again, I'm sure we will. But I'm sure there's some exciting and some fun days in our future coming up with our current regime that we have at this point.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
It's always been an interesting situation.
Indeed.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to play a little music as well today, but we have David Miller with us today, and we're going to talk about some presidents and some of the history behind the presidents as we keep you in touch with not only the best in classic hits, but also a little bit of history today with my buddy Dave. interesting book that you got there, Dave.
Well, first of all, who was the first president of the United States? And it wasn't George Washington. It was let's see, how did they put it? President of the Continental Congress.
Okay, all right.
And the first one was Peyton Randolph.
Okay.
Who probably many people wouldn't know, but John Hancock was actually president of the United States twice. He was the 4th and the 13th president of the United States, president of the Congress.
Okay, all right.
Which is a distinction, but anyhow.
So really, as we started with this whole process, there was not really a president as we know it.
No.
He was the president of the Congress.
Yeah, he just basically oversaw the things that were going on in Congress. It wasn't.
Okay.
It was more like what do they call it in England? Prime Minister.
Okay.
Really,
right.
More like, instead of a president as we think of them.
Yeah, sure.
So.
Adobe Gray, 1973. How's
there
that?
you go. I knew it was the 70s. I was just going, what year? Okay. President of the United States that we wanted to talk about today.
Yes.
The first one we decided on would be Ulysses S. Grant. During the Civil War, they hung their hats on the idea of unconditional surrender grant.
Okay.
And so they came up with a middle name, which they called him Ulysses Simpson Grant, which was actually not his middle name at all. They just made that up. His actual birth date, his actual name that he was born with was Hiram Ulysses Grant. Mm-hmm. And they dropped the Hiram and went with the Simpson instead. And anyhow, that's just a bit of trivia for you.
Darn. That's amazing. Okay, all right.
Another one we'll move on to, let's see, is, James Buchanan. James Buchanan was unique in American history. He was the only bachelor president. So we've got that one we can mark off.
I'll tell you what, you think about that and you don't realize that, because every president that we've had, there's a first lady involved.
Indeed.
Something like that. So a bachelor president, no first lady whatsoever.
No.
Okay. Was he a fellow that had girlfriends throughout his presidency?
Not really. He was pretty much of a loner.
Okay.
One of the things I think about, too, was Thomas Jefferson's wife had died. Mm-hmm. And so, let's see, James Madison was his Secretary of State, as I recall. So Dolly Madison served as his, essentially, First Lady, although she wasn't really, until later when Madison became president. He also had, I think, a niece, or perhaps a daughter. I think it was his daughter, served in the function of First Lady, but not actually. Yeah,
you really, the First Lady nowadays has a number of functions that she does perform.
Right.
Oftentimes they're behind the scenes. You don't see them every day, but there are duties for her nowadays as well as the president too.
Well, and pretty much First Ladies make up their own topics that they really like a lot and that they really pursue, Mrs. Obama was really into health, health for kids,
right.
and that's a worthy, a worthy task. So, we can learn a lot from them.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So it's hard for us to comprehend, I think, a little bit that there would be a president without a first lady at his side at that point in time, but there was one at one point in time.
But he was our 15th president. Yeah. So, and the thing with Jefferson was he was only the 3rd president. So there weren't too many precedents that went along with being president.
Sure. Yeah, we were learning as we were going.
Basically, and one of the things that Washington is really outstanding about is that he set all of the precedents for those who would follow after him. Mm-hmm. The idea of a 2-term president began with Washington, and pretty much held out until Franklin Roosevelt. He's pronounced it differently than Theodore did. By the way, Teddy was never allowed in his house. He hated that term, although his nickname when he was a boy was T.D.
Okay.
But that was as far as it went, and it was only family that was allowed to call him that. Everybody else called him the Colonel or TR.
Okay.
So when they came up with the bear idea, he wasn't too thrilled.
Really?
He didn't like that at all.
He was, in not being the historian that you are, or that a number of people are, But he was always one of the intriguing presidents to me, just because of the image they portrayed of that man.
Yeah.
Was that image pretty much correct? I mean, the swashbuckling.
He was a real far out character for that era.
Yeah.
You're thinking the early 1900s, and people don't give William McKinley enough credit for having an outstanding change of venue from the 1800s to the 1900s. He was the crossover president, and really outstanding in his own way. But he was entirely different from Roosevelt. Roosevelt was he had, I think, 6 kids or something like that. Children, I guess they would call them in those days. Mm-hmm. And they took ponies up to the second floor because one of the boys was sick. I mean, it was crazy things like that. They rode the pony up and down up the White House halls and things like that. It was just a really wild bunch. And Alice Roosevelt later became Mrs. Longworth. Theodore said one time, "I can either be president of the United States or I can be a father of Alice. I can't do both." So she was kind of a handful. She was one of the first women to smoke in public. I mean,
oh my God.
that was a real eye opener there. So.
When did we start to get all of this pomp and circumstance around our presidents? Because if the Roosevelts were taking horses up to the second floor and allowing their children to basically ride a horse through the White House on the second floor, when did all of a sudden this thing become, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, nowadays, to think that anybody would bring a horse or any kind of animal like that into the White House would be appalling. It'd be on social media. It'd be everywhere. But when did that change? When did we start to become a little more, perfect in the White House?
I would think pretty much when John Kennedy came in. Mm-hmm. His wife, Jacqueline, was really one of those upper crust kind of ladies. She redid the White House, which had been done numerous times before, but she was looking for paintings and original furniture and things like that she brought in, which is something that very few presidents or first ladies had ever done before.
Yeah.
So I think that would be one of the most outstanding pomp and circumstance kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. All right, who's next on our list here?
Oh, let's see. Okay, let's go to President number 28, Woodrow Wilson.
Okay.
What was his first name?
Woodrow.
No, that's too easy. His first name was Thomas.
Okay.
But he didn't go by that at all.
All right.
He was. He was president of Princeton University before he became president, and he wrote a book about Congress, which he had never actually had to deal with before, but it was something that was on his mind and something that he enjoyed, and so he wrote a book about Congress. I haven't read it yet, but I would like to sometime. We've had 2 presidents now who have been father and son. We start out with the Adamses, with John Adams and John Quincy Adams, which wasn't they weren't too far apart. John Adams was second and John Quincy Adams was sixth. But even closer, and we will remember this, is the Bushes. Right. George Herbert Walker Bush was 41, and George Walker Bush was 43.
Right.
But there was actually a grandfather and grandson presidents. William Henry Harrison, who was the ninth president, was grandfather to Benjamin Harrison, who was the 23rd president. So we've got quite a space in between.
Huh. Amazing.
Yeah.
It's fun to think about, especially in the time that we're in right now, when the president that we have is such a different type of president than what we've had for a long, long time. Catching all the headlines that he does and tweeting I can't imagine. I can't imagine anybody going back in the past as being a tweeter. Okay, but maybe anybody off the top of your head, as you look back through those presidents, if they had that technology, that would have been a likely tweeting president there for you, David.
Let's just put it like this. I think Mr. Trump has them all trumped. Nobody, and that's a play on words, but still, it's a fact. Nobody else even considered doing something like that.
Yeah.
We had a interesting situation with Secretary Clinton, and I think there's still some controversy about some of her emails, but we don't really have to worry about that at this point, anyhow.
Right. That's kind of in the past here at this point.
It may seem so. We'll see what happens in the future.
You never can tell.
No doubt.
In the future. That's
No
for
doubt.
Darn sure. David Miller is our guest today. We are talking presidents. We're going to get back into some music, and we have some O&N news that we need to take care of right now. But we will continue our conversation with Dave right after we get back to some Elton John and get you updated on what's going on around Ohio and the world on O&N News. 25 till 12 here on the Q 96.5. to get to that again. So David Miller with us here. Dave, let's go back a little bit. Who's our next president that we want to chat about here a little bit?
Number 27, William Howard Taft.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he was the only person, man or woman, to become both president and Chief Justice of the United States.
Okay.
It was a thing he dreamed of all of his life. He was associated with being a lawyer all of his life. His father had been in legal, he had been a judge. His father served twice as Secretary of War under two different presidents. And so it was basically in his blood. The law was totally his. Even when he was president, he kept trying to push things to straighten out the Supreme Court. There were a lot of things that weren't going right, and Taft tried to make them better. But because he was a very weak president, he couldn't get very much done. And he had a lot of very strong members of Congress who wanted to get those things done that were separate from him, and so Taft is not remembered as a very strong president at all, and he really wasn't. He was quoted as saying, "Presidents, politics when I am in them makes me sick," and he didn't mind politics when it was somebody else, but for himself, he didn't like it at all, and so he was a one-term president, and the only reason he ran the second time was because Theodore Roosevelt was a progressive, and he thought Roosevelt was just way out of his league, and so he ran against him. He only got only carried two states like Vermont and Utah, and Roosevelt carried quite a few more. But because of the Republican split, Woodrow Wilson was elected president. Thomas Woodrow Wilson, and since Taft was the Chief Justice, they are usually the ones who swear in presidents of the United States, and so he got to swear in Herbert Clark Hoover, and that was the only person that he was able to swear in. He died about 6 days after, in 1930s, about 6 days after he resigned.
Wow.
And another thing we can talk about President Hoover, or about Calvin Coolidge. He was the only man who was sworn in by his father. His father was Justice of the Peace in Vermont, and President Harding died, and they sent a telegram to the vice president, said, "You need to become president, get yourself someplace where you can be sworn in," and so his father swore him in about midnight. He swore him in as president because he was Justice of the Peace, and they went back to bed. That's how cool the Coolidges were. It was just like, okay, let's get this over with. Now it's time to go to bed. He would take naps 2 or 3 times a day when he was president. It was just that kind of guy. And in those days, things pretty much ran themselves. So he didn't really, bother with it. It was laissez-faire, basically. Let things happen as they will.
Yeah. And
so he just kept hands off. There was a quote one time. 2 ladies were betting one another that they could get him to say more than 2 words. And he turned to the other lady and said, "You lose."
I love that's funny. Yeah, that is funny.
But he did things like putting on Indian headdresses and things like that. And, people remind him of being really boring, but he did some kind of silly things sometimes, things like that.
It because now we expect so much out of our presidents, okay? They have to dress a certain way, they have to act a certain way, they have to speak a certain way, they have to be very cautious and guarded with everything they do. That's not been the history, though, of the President of the United States, has it been?
In fact, I think the last president who ever wore a top hat was John Kennedy.
Okay.
That went out after that. They pretty much went bareheaded from then on. Maybe overcoats because all of them in January these days.
Yeah.
They had a blizzard when Taft became president, and Roosevelt said, "I knew there'd be I knew there'd be really cold when I left the White House," which was kind of a prescience maybe of what was ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, what's Harry S. Truman's middle name?
Oh, there we go.
I figured I'd ask you that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. President Truman's middle name was S.
Okay.
So if any place you see a period after it, it's wrong. I don't know what his parents were thinking, but maybe they didn't want to saddle him with a middle name, I guess, so they just called him S.
They called him S. That's amazing.
Which is really funny because I read some books by Margaret Truman, and she put an S after his name, and that was wrong. She should have known better.
Oh, man, that's amazing. You think of it, because you always hear, Harry S. Truman.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever thought about what the S stood for.
Yeah.
Right? Until I ran across you, and then the S is just an S. There's no
that's all there is.
Sam or Sid or anything else in there. It was just Harry S.
I think one of the things I learned, and I was curious about it because everything was Donald J. Trump,
Mm-hmm.
all the thing, until he was actually inaugurated, and he said Donald John Trump.
Yeah.
So we learned what his middle name was there.
Yeah.
But I had been curious about that, wondering what it was, or if it was just a J like Harry S. Truman,
No doubt about that.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton's full names.
Yeah, he was an interesting character in himself, but let's see. He had two middle names. He was named, and we think pretty much about him as William Jefferson Clinton, or Bill, as he preferred. He was different than Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter was sworn in as Jimmy Carter. He was actually James Earl Carter, named after his father, his middle name.
Okay.
But President Clinton, his second middle name was Blythe, which was his mother's maiden name.
Wow.
So
just
curious things like
William
that.
Jefferson Blythe Clinton.
Yes.
Really, when you look at the full
And I
name for him.
think that's how he was sworn in the first time.
Okay.
He dropped the Blythe in the second one.
Okay.
But,
Well, it's a mouthful, man. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that.
And one of the curious things about the Barack Obama second administration, as Chief Justice John Roberts was administering the oath of office, he got some of the words backwards, and Obama looked at him kind of strange, like, "What you doing here?"
Mm-hmm.
And he just repeated everything the Chief Justice said, but they had to have a private ceremony afterward to make sure all their P's and Q's were covered.
So it was official.
They went through after the inaugural balls that night. Then afterwards, the Chief Justice came over and got it right. So.
Wow. You were telling me off mic too that Abe Lincoln was not the first Republican presidential candidate, I guess, to put it that way.
Yes, John C. Fremont, who was basically an explorer, but he was the first nominee of the brand new Republican Party. Used to be the Whigs, but they abandoned that, and he was defeated by James Buchanan. Excuse me.
Okay, all right. And then Lincoln was the first Republican, though, to be elected.
The first elected.
And Republicans, obviously, anytime you try to back a Republican into a corner about how many great presidents you've had, they always go back to the first one, don't we, huh?
Yeah.
At that point in time.
And it seems like Virginia and Ohio have kind of had a battle going back and forth to see who can get the most elected. At this point, Virginia has us by one, but Ohio's right behind them.
How many presidents for Virginia?
I think there were 8, and 7 for Ohio.
And 7 for Ohio right now. Wow.
So I remember when John Glenn was running for president, and I'm going, I really don't want him, but it would make it tied.
That's funny. Why did you get involved with this? What drew you towards the presidency of the United States in the history?
I had excellent teachers when I was a kid. When I was in 5th grade, my teacher was Norma Fish, and I still know her to this day. She's a remarkable lady, a devout Christian, and she's just somebody who really turned me on to history in a way that nobody else ever did. I've had different English teachers who really meant a lot to me too, and that's helped me write these books. But when it comes to history, she's the first one that really got me going.
Yeah. All right, we're running out of time. Let's grab a couple more facts here before this hour is over, because it flies by, man.
Well, one of the things I really need to give credit to is Tom Dominic. Mm-hmm. People know him from this area. He's been principal over here a couple times. One of the things that Tom Dominic did for me was he was the one that first got me started with listing the presidents.
Okay.
We had to memorize the list, and I've still got it to this day. I just keep adding to it every 4 or 8 years, depending on what it is. But I remember one of the things Ronald Reagan said. Well, when I was a boy, we had to memorize the list of presidents, but it was a whole lot shorter in those days.
You do a pretty good Reagan, man.
I enjoy that. Yeah.
That's fun. I think as we go on with this program, I'm going to need a Ronnie Reagan impersonation out of you every now and then.
There you go again.
I think this might come in handy, bud. How's that? I think that works well.
Honey, I forgot to duck.
That's terrible. That is bad.
He did, though. That's what he said.
That's exactly what he said.
Yeah.
He was one of a kind as well, man.
Indeed.
No doubt about that.
And again, it's controversial, but who wasn't really?
Yeah, that is for sure. Well, I think the one thing we can agree on is that every president that we've had has his pluses and his minuses. They're
exactly.
all human beings.
That's right. That's right. And we shouldn't hold them to a higher standard all that much, because they're just as human as we are.
Yes.
They make mistakes. Sometimes they do great things. I don't know whether it's a God thing or whether it's something that just rolls with the cards that you're dealt. Obama had a whole lot of financial difficulties when he came in, and I have some pluses and minuses for him too,
sure.
Which I won't go into.
No doubt about that. All right, David. One last time, the book that is on the market right now that they can buy, and where can they get your latest book?
A Traveler's True Tale: My Journey with Lewis and Clark is available with Amazon, with Barnes & Noble as book in book form. It's also available on Amazon as a Kindle book. So those of you who like ebooks, it's available. You can use it for your pad or your computer, whichever you prefer, and it's about half the price. So go ahead and get it.
It works out extremely well.
Exactly.
Extremely well. Your son Ezra is playing music, and I highly recommend anybody listening to us right now that if they get a chance to see Ezra play anywhere, because he plays at Father John's and he plays at several other locations around the area. What a wonderful young fellow that guy is. Too.
And there's a good chance he's going to be going up to Ypsilanti, Michigan. They've invited him to come play for a church up there. So he and his wife are thinking about moving up there.
Oh, wonderful for him.
As long as they don't go to Ann Arbor, I don't mind. There's no lack of diplomacy there by any means.
Yeah, not at all. Is the Buckeye shirt underneath the shirt the NASA shirt you're wearing?
No. It's in the closet back home.
That sounds like fun. Hey, I appreciate your time today, and happy anniversary, man. 38 years. That's
no
a wonderful
doubt.
Situation.
This very day.
That's fantastic. David Miller has been our guest here today. He'll be back in the future, I'm sure. We'll talk more about the presidents of the United States and the history behind them, and what an appropriate thing to talk about on a day like today when we've had all the controversy that we've had. And I'm sure there is more coming with our current president. That'll be one that you can add to your list as we go down the line. And if we get to be older men, Dave, we'll be looking back and talking about President Trump down the road, and you'll have some notations in that nice green binder that you've got for us.
You got it. You got it.
All right, David Miller's been our guest. It's time for us to step away for our noon news block. When we come back, it's you and me and music all the way until 1 o'clock in the Dome today here on the Q 96.5 FM.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining.